I've been through a lot. Like, I think that I had, I had kind of my parents had like this really rough divorce. And I think that that's where things really started. And then from there, like I became pescatarian and my health declined. And then I was really struggling and I was introduced to gender ideology and really through critical gender theory through the university system when I became a women's studies minor in college. And then from there, I believed I was non-binary in 2016 and I got top surgery. And then I realized that I was never non-binary, that there was a disconnect with my body and trauma had played a huge role in that. So that's really kind of the basis of my story. And I'm really interested in talking with you today about like how gender ideology and also critical gender theory has played a negative impact on my life, and how I think a lot of people mean well and that's why it appeals to them, but it's not a healthy approach to dealing with issues.
So as a child growing up, did you not feel comfortable as a female? Were you considering that maybe you were really a man born in a woman's body, and nature had dealt you a bad set? Or like, what were you thinking prior to going to college and studying critical gender theory?
So part of it was, well, when growing up, I actually didn't really have the gender issues. It wasn't until sixth grade when there was this traumatic event that happened and it impacted, I just had trauma around my sexuality and around being a woman in sixth grade. So that's when this all started. And from there,
were you abused at that age, or did something?
What happened was that, well, a couple of things happened. One of them was that my father, trying to protect me, told me how men his age talked sexually about girls my age. And he was trying to get me to dress more modestly and to be, I think that it was well-intentioned, but it ended up making me really nervous. And then on top of that, in sixth grade, my best friend had been raped by her brother. And so that had a huge impact on me. And it just impacted my relationship with my gender. And then I ended up at that time identifying more with boys for like anime and such. And it just, that's where it really started, was back in sixth grade. I went to Portland State University.
And that was it particularly because of what you wanted to study, or was that because of geographic proximity to your home?
It was partially it was cost. I actually wasn't quite sure what I wanted to get into, and so that was part of the issue as well.
Okay, so then at that point, had you had experience dating boys at all, like in high school, or were you dating in college at all, or were you okay? And were you like studying people like Judith Butler, who I attributed to being like one of the founders of gender studies? Were you like studying their writings or stuff, or were there certain classes? Like, what were they teaching you that you latched onto that was alluring to you?
I read, let's see here, Naomi Wolf's, can't remember the title of the book now, but I read that, like, it was like the beauty myth or something. I can't quite remember, but I was reading a lot of works. Like, they would particularly have us read essays from different authors. It's kind of interesting thinking back on it, because there was this focus on critical gender theory, but also critical race theory. So that was kind of coming into it. But it's interesting because they don't really, like, I've never heard anybody say critical gender theory or critical race theory while I was a women's studies minor. So I think that that's interesting that they're not even saying that. Like, I also never heard I know people are talking about Marxism and how these theories are based on Marxism, but they don't sell it as Marxism. Like, they're not introducing this as like, this is a Marxist way of thinking. It's just kind of like woven into the theory itself.
Were you exposed to like feminist ideology or radical feminist ideology at all, or was it more along the lines of the gender?
We were introduced to it. It's kind of like odd because it's almost like, it's like maybe throwing the kitchen sink at it is the best way to describe it, because they throw all these ideologies and subsections of thoughts in together, and so you don't know which ideology you're getting, if that makes sense. Or like, not ideology, but like for radical feminism, like that subsection of feminism, you don't know necessarily which you're getting, because it's like, maybe there's some conservative feminism in the what you're reading, but they're not actually separating that out to you. And I think that that's part of the issue too, is that, they have all these different schools of thought, and there's going to be clashing with each other because you're going to have people who will have different goals, and it's not always going to mesh.
Yeah, actually, I was reading the Communist Manifesto. Sometimes I have a hard time falling asleep, so I read some of the Marx and Engels' political economic theories. And so I was actually reading the Communist Manifesto. And what struck me is the very first sentences, and I'm going to misquote it, but it basically says this. It says, "The history of the world hitherto now is the same. It is lord against serf, plebeian against patrion, journeyman and guildman, and in a word, oppressor against oppressed. And they both go to battle until both sides are destroyed or the oppressed overcome." And so you see this, and it really struck me because, as we look at the culture wars now, and now that people are studying a lot, like the roots of these ideologies, it really has this dialectic approach where it paints everybody as the oppressed class or the oppressor class. The males are the toxic masculinity is the source of all problems, and the females are the oppressed, or the black man in particular is the oppressed over with the white man, or the cisgender, which is a new term, or heteronormativity oppresses the gender queer. And so it's this battle to really pit people against one another. And to me, you just see the manifest evidence of what's happening is abject hatred, and really a war. And it applies to all of it. It seems like there's they're all kind of tied together in this cultural Marxism, because as we know in the West, Marxism did not take. And one of the reasons was the strength of family, the strength of the church. There was a guy named Antonio Gramsci, who was an Italian communist. He wrote the Prison Diaries, and he talked about cultural hegemony, and that those need to be broken down for communism to really rule. And so it seems like it's really grabbed hold of these ideologies in the university of the oppressor-oppressed dialectic, which is, I'm just seeing that it's causing so many problems and so much attack on every aspect of what we've historically known to be true: a war on family, fatherhood, institutions, the military, and it's just it just seems like then this postmodern, nothing has meaning, woke activism fuels it, and it's causing so many sociological problems, and people like yourself become victims to it, and the consequences are real. There is pain. And so I don't know, I mean, I'm just sharing some thoughts that I had, some of the things that I've been reading and learning recently, and I was wondering if you had any comments about that, if you felt like that agenda was being pushed in the university, or what your experiences were with that.
Yeah, I think that part of it is that you have people like me who are really struggling emotionally and who aren't getting help. So I think that it's also a wider issue as well, because I had like before when I identified or thought I was like non-binary, I had at that point, before doing the top surgery, had done like 20 years of talk therapy. I had done EMDR, or including like EMDR, DBT. And so I don't remember what EMDR means, but DBT is dialectical behavior therapy, which is really a skill-based therapy. And so then I had done 2 rounds of TMS, which is transcranial magnetic stimulation therapy, which is a cousin to ECT, or electroconvulsive therapy, but not as severe. But I was really struggling within the current system, and when I got better through my physical health, then it was like, that's what I needed all along, was that I needed to be better physically. Like, that was the root cause. And so my concern is that people like myself who are in that vulnerable state are being sold this idea of you're depressed because of sexism, because of transphobia, because of racism, when it's like, it could be an underlying issue, like with myself, that just needs to be addressed.
And during those talk therapies, and like you said, you had some trauma. Obviously, it's in 6th grade. I know that EMDR, I've actually done it. I thought it was pretty fascinating. Did you find relief doing that, or did you feel like it was like not really getting at the issues? Or how would you evaluate? It sounds like it wasn't a perfect panacea for you, but did you find that talk therapy and some of those other treatments, were they helpful for you in terms of wholeness and health?
They weren't helpful to me. And I think that that's part of that again is that what I really needed was to address my physical health. And this is something that I think is being really overlooked. I do really think that we need to look at the physical health aspect, because I know like I did hyperbaric oxygen therapy and I was part of a case study for that. And for that study, I did like a questionnaire, like a self questionnaire, and I went from mild no, what was it? Yeah, I think it was it was moderate to severe anxiety to mild anxiety through 60 treatments. And then my ADHD went from like 75 to 7. I don't remember the exact number, but it was remarkable how much that treatment helped me. And so I'm really honed in on the holistic health, because I was surprised that it helped me that much. And, I started eating meat again. I was pescatarian for about 10 years, and that had an impact on me. And it wasn't until I saw Michaela Pearson, I'm like, oh, she seems pretty stable. Like I'm gonna try eating meat again. And that was probably good because my ferritin levels were really low. But I feel like there's this sort of, we're overlooking the physical aspect of it. And even though, kind of go back to your question, I feel that, because I had all the skills from doing all these years of therapy, but it doesn't mean anything if you don't have like the physical aspect as well going for you.
So you were obviously struggling with your physical health, and you were looking for relief with some of the mental health issues that you were facing. And so you go to a university and you're learning these new things, and you're taking it in, you're internalizing it. And it seems like you were obviously drawn toward these thought processes in hope of finding relief. Maybe you were feeling like being non-binary, and then this went on for a period of time. And then you said that you were led into top surgery. And so why don't you take us through that process of, being a younger woman in the university, struggling physically and mentally, looking for relief. And, what was your process and to lead you to such a dramatic steps that you took?
Yeah, so I know that those were a little bit of a different time. So I went to university in 2010, and I do remember one of the professors implying that we were depressed because of sexism. So there was definitely this sort of push of like, you're miserable because of you're the oppressed, right? And so I was introduced there to this idea that you can be this third gender, or like non-binary, or like a gender outside of that. But the thing is that nobody talked about the fact that there is no biological equivalent to non-binary. It's very odd. And yet everybody, like the Medicaid considered my surgery, the top surgery, medical necessity. So it's very odd, because there's that sort of like not thinking things through, because there's such a focus on, albeit meaning, there's this focus on, we need to take care of those who are hurting, the idea of like those who are oppressed. So there's that fixation on that. And then because there's such a fixation on that, it's not looking at things objectively, in that, like I was saying, like that you can be non-binary and have this surgery that there's no equivalent in nature for.
And how long was the process from when you first had the thought that I'm non-binary and to actually going through with a double mastectomy? Like, what was that process like? You had to have had some self-doubts, this is permanent. Is this the right thing? What were you thinking about? Like, what was going through your mind, and how long was that process?
Yeah, so I started believing I was non-binary around 2016 when I seen a gender therapist, which again wasn't objective. And she actually believed in otherkin, which should have been like this red flag. But which otherkin, from my understanding, is like you believe you think that you're an animal, or it's this sort of like other identity with like animals. So that should have been like a red flag. But it's sort of like, well, you just feel like that when you're in that ideology, like, well, there are people who again, that sort of oppressed, like, well, maybe I'm wrong, or like, it's just like this sort of like second guessing rather than thinking of things critically. But so yeah, I identified or I believed I was non-binary for years. And then I asked my doctor about top surgery, and then they connected me with these two gender, like mental health professionals. And then from there, within months, it was like, because I got my first letter in like May, the second in July, and then I had the surgery in August. And so it was I'm surprised that it went that quickly, but the reality is that they are pushing these through rather quickly.